I've received a huge number of questions about cottage cheese. You'd think cottage cheese is a product everyone knows from childhood. It's recommended for athletes, for kids, and it's used in diets. And even though it's been around forever, there's still a lot of rumors about its benefits, its harms, and some unexpected properties. Let's figure out what modern science actually thinks about this traditional product. Basically, it really is an ancient product. It's believed that it first appeared completely by accident among nomadic tribes several thousand years ago, when milk soured in wineskins, which were made from animal stomachs, under the influence of rennet, and that's how cottage cheese was created. It was even present in ancient Rome. They called it sour cheese bread and valued it highly. Cottage cheese is usually thought of as just protein. Well, on the one hand, yes, it's protein, but it's not just protein because this product is essentially functional and has a variety of effects on the body. Since we started talking about protein, it's probably the gold standard of protein, especially for muscles. We know that the most optimal protein in terms of composition and amino acid profile is, of course, egg white. But when we're talking about muscles, cottage cheese is actually the best in terms of composition, and it's a source of casein protein, about 70%, and whey protein, which is about 30%. But casein is absorbed slowly, which means it provides a prolonged supply of amino acids to the muscles. This is especially important for athletes, first and foremost, and for people who work out or train. And studies by British scientists published in the British Journal of Nutrition show that consuming casein, the very same one found in cottage cheese, before bed stimulates muscle protein synthesis basically throughout the entire night. That's why cottage cheese is the perfect evening snack for anyone who cares about their muscle mass and overall health. That's why the uniqueness lies precisely in the slow digesting protein, and scientists refer to it as the postprandial persistent effect. In other words, while a person is sleeping, cottage cheese eaten 30 to 60 minutes before bed doesn't provoke acid reflux disease and won't cause heartburn because it's soft and will leave the stomach quickly. 30 to 60 minutes is plenty of time. At the same time, it continues to provide a steady level of amino acids in the blood, turning the nighttime from a catabolic breakdown process into an anabolic one, a period of muscle growth. And this is the simplest and most natural nighttime protein. Even Arnold Schwarzenegger and other bodybuilders from the golden era of bodybuilding made cottage cheese the main product in their diets, getting most of their protein from it because it was accessible and effective for building muscle mass. Well, it's not just muscles, bones and teeth grow too. That's why cottage cheese is one of the best dietary sources of both calcium and phosphorus. Even the International Journal of Osteoporosis conducted a meta-analysis and confirmed that adequate calcium intake from dairy products increases bone density, mineral bone density, and reduces the risk of fractures, especially in older adults. It's not just muscles, bones, and teeth that are connected to cottage cheese. Cottage cheese also helps restore their health. And even though cottage cheese contains fat, it can actually be a great and powerful ally in weight loss and slimming down. Our Canadian colleagues at McMaster University conducted a study on this. The study showed that eating cottage cheese before bed not only doesn't lead to fat gain, but actually speeds up your metabolism because the combination of protein and calcium in the product boosts thermogenesis. In other words, calories are burned faster and more efficiently during digestion. This suppresses your appetite. It's a great story. But at the same time, cottage cheese can also be used as a metabolic booster before bed. And another recent study, published in the Journal of Nutrition, shows that casein not only nourishes your muscles, but also significantly speeds up your morning metabolism if you eat it at night. And your body spends more energy digesting and processing protein in the long run. And this helps with weight control and reducing calorie intake. And actually, if we look at some historical examples, like Miss America, for instance, especially in the post-war years in the US, cottage cheese served on half a canned peach was probably the star or symbol of diet food. And every other Hollywood star recommended eating half a peach with cottage cheese to maintain their figure and beauty. And nowadays, both fitness bloggers and athletes continue this tradition, coming up with endless recipes based on cottage cheese, protein cheesecakes, casseroles, and desserts. There are actually a lot of studies about what seems like an ordinary product, cottage cheese. And it turns out that it has a strong impact on gut health and immunity. Modern research shows that cottage cheese, especially the live cultures it contains, can act as a probiotic. In other words, it contains beneficial bacteria. Journals like Nutrients point out that fermented dairy products, including cottage cheese, help increase the diversity of beneficial gut microflora, which directly affects immunity, overall health, and general well-being. And this is actually one of the most promising areas today. At least, that's how it seems to me. There was also another very interesting study published in the journal Cell Reports. It found that certain peptides, that is, chains of amino acids, that form during the fermentation of cottage cheese can selectively and specifically stimulate the growth of certain types of lactobacilli. These lactobacilli are very beneficial and produce butyrate and other short-chain fatty acids. And these are exactly what strengthen the intestinal permeability that everyone is talking about these days, and they reinforce the gut's barrier function. Because of this, they naturally boost the immune response and reduce systemic inflammation. Cottage cheese doesn't just affect bones, muscles, the gut, and the microbiome, it also impacts the brain. On one hand, we know there's a lot of data now about the so-called gut-brain connection. There's this gut-brain axis, and so, by improving the state of the microbiome, cottage cheese indirectly affects brain function as well, and helps with neuroprotection, because a stable and diverse microbiota lowers the risk of neurodegenerative diseases. That's very important. But it's not just an indirect effect, there's also a direct one, because cottage cheese contains an amino acid called tryptophan. It's a precursor to serotonin, the so-called happiness hormone. Cottage cheese is also rich in B vitamins, especially B12, which are essential for nourishing the nervous system. So, if you eat cottage cheese regularly, it will help improve brain function and the nervous system as a whole, and it will also affect mood stability and sleep quality. It seems like you could go on listing the health benefits of cottage cheese forever. It's even good for your liver, because cottage cheese is one of the best sources of methionine, an essential amino acid that acts as a hepatoprotector and was even once used as a pill, as a medicinal remedy. Methionine, an amino acid used to treat liver problems, is still used today, along with adenosylmethionine. Why? Because it actually supports the main detoxification process in the liver, the so-called methionine cycle. It also takes part in the synthesis of phospholipids, helps with detoxification, and prevents fatty liver. That's why, thanks to its high content of both methionine and choline, cottage cheese can be considered a dietary remedy to help prevent fatty liver disease. And all these substances have a lipotropic effect. They help the liver process and remove excess fat, basically relieving it from an overload of fat. But if cottage cheese has so many health benefits, could it also have any harmful effects? Can cottage cheese be harmful? And here, it's important to separate myths from actual medical facts. And the first thing associated with cottage cheese is, of course, lactose intolerance. We usually slap that label on any dairy product if we start feeling unwell after eating it. But when it comes to cottage cheese, you should know that it's a fermented product. What does fermentation mean? We took milk, which had 5% sugar, added extra bacteria to it, and those bacteria ate up all 5% of the sugar, leaving just 0.5%, just a tiny bit they couldn't finish. That's why, essentially, there's no lactose in cottage cheese at all, because the microbes that make it have already processed all the lactose. So lactose intolerance is more of a myth than a fact. And if there is any kind of reaction to cottage cheese, it's probably better to link it to casein itself and allergic reactions rather than to lactose. Another hidden threat in cottage cheese is sodium, specifically salt. Surprisingly, many manufacturers add salt to cottage cheese to improve its taste and extend its shelf life. Of course, this isn't ideal, especially for people who have kidney problems or high blood pressure. So here, you just need to be a careful consumer and read the label closely to check how much salt is in it. Or you can make cottage cheese yourself at home, especially since it's quite easy to prepare. There is always a pressing question about hormones. They say that cottage cheese probably also contains hormones, and they can affect some hormonal levels. But today we know for sure, and the Journal of Nutrition has found no evidence that cottage cheese can affect hormones in any way. And this myth comes from two prejudices. The first is the belief that all animals are injected with hormones. But listen, even if that were true, the hormones go into muscle growth and are used up, so there aren't any left in the milk. But the second issue really is about the hormones that are released during lactation. And for example, even in humans, in women's breast milk, there can be a lot of estrogens. Those are the female sex hormones. But here it's very important to know the timing of when they're released. They're present literally only in the first 3 to 5 days after the milk appears. That's true for both humans and cows. So there's really no reason to worry about estrogens somehow getting in. And even if they do get in, it would be an extremely rare occurrence and only in microscopic amounts. So there's definitely no need to worry about hormones. But there are still concerns about low-fat versus full-fat cottage cheese. Is there something tricky going on here? A little bit. Why? Because on the one hand, the process of making low-fat cottage cheese is actually very simple. I'd even say it's not chemical, which is what everyone's afraid of, but mechanical. Basically, they take milk, ferment it, then heat it up, separate the whey and fat, and run it through a centrifuge separator. And under the influence of centrifugal force, as everything spins and swirls, the heavier protein settles while the lighter fat stays on the surface. Depending on the fat content of the cottage cheese they want to make, that's how much fat they leave in. So there's definitely no chemical component involved here at all. There's no need to worry about that. But when it comes to health effects, there is a difference between full-fat and fat-free cottage cheese. And as surprising as it may seem, the advantage is actually with the full-fat cottage cheese. It appears to be healthier. Why is that? Well, fat-free cottage cheese, which is 0 or 1% fat, does have fewer calories, and it's pretty much pure protein. Fewer calories because there's no fat. So basically, only pure protein is left. On one hand, for the cutting phase, for athletes for example, this is a very useful and critically important product, because they control their calories but still need to get enough protein. But the big downside of fat-free cottage cheese is that fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K are absorbed worse because they're fat-soluble and all the fat has been removed. And what's even worse is that calcium is hardly absorbed at all from fat-free cottage cheese. And so you get this paradox. We need vitamin D for calcium to be absorbed, but we've removed vitamin D from the product since it's fat-soluble, and while there's calcium in there, it just passes through and can't be absorbed at all. So it turns out that it's basically a useless product. We eat it hoping to get calcium. There really is calcium in it, but we just can't get any of it. That's why the downsides of fat-free cottage cheese clearly outweigh the benefits. But if we take cottage cheese with medium fat content, like 5%, or high fat content, like 9%, then of course there are more vitamins, calcium is absorbed better, and the composition is closer to natural. And in this fat, there's conjugated linoleic acid, which is a healthy fat that, according to recent research, helps with weight control and also has anti-inflammatory properties. And the only downside to full-fat cottage cheese is just a slightly higher calorie content. But if you generally watch what you eat, then it really doesn't make any difference. So it turns out that for most people, cottage cheese with a fat content of 5 to 9% is optimal, since it provides the maximum benefit from all the nutrients it contains. You know, people even write in the comments like cottage cheese just doesn't work for them, they can't eat it. What can you substitute for it? Let's figure this out. By the way, leave a comment about whether you eat cottage cheese or not, how often you eat it, whether you think it's a healthy food or not, or maybe you have some kind of reaction to it, or it just really doesn't work for you. or maybe you're interested in some other product. Leave more comments, and I'll record another new video. For those friends of yours who love cottage cheese, send them this video. Let them know what cottage cheese is actually good for and what it can be bad for. Or if you see someone eating fat-free cottage cheese, send them this video too. Let them eat regular, not fat-free cottage cheese and get more benefits from it, because maybe they're hoping to get calcium from it, but it turns out it just passes right through them. So why isn't cottage cheese suitable for everyone, and what can you substitute it with? Actually, there are a few hidden pitfalls here. The first one is lactose. So even though cottage cheese has almost zero lactose, for people who have a really severe form of lactase deficiency, sometimes even a tiny amount, just a little bit, is enough to cause bloating, discomfort, diarrhea, pain, or something else. That's why, for people with very severe lactase deficiency, the lactose in cottage cheese can still play a role, but overall, it's neutralized by the lactase enzyme. Nowadays, you can easily find it in any pharmacy or on any online marketplace. You just take a dairy product, eat it together with the enzyme, and there are no problems at all. The second very important issue related to why cottage cheese doesn't work for some people is, of course, casein. That's the main protein in cottage cheese. And if someone is allergic to casein or other whey proteins, then they'll have to completely avoid cottage cheese or replace it with cottage cheese from another source, like goat or sheep, where the casein has a different structure and doesn't cause an allergic reaction. Another important component is still histamine. Even though there's not much written or talked about it online, let me tell you that it's a substance that can potentially cause allergies or allergy-like reactions, which are called pseudoallergies. In terms of symptoms, it can look a lot like a regular allergy. You might feel itchy somewhere, get redness, have a runny nose, watery eyes, or even a mild headache. And there are people who are specifically intolerant to histamine. They react not only to cottage cheese, but also to other foods that are high in histamine. For example, seafood, and this is related to a deficiency, a lack of the enzyme diamine oxidase. So if a person doesn't have enough of this enzyme and eats foods high in histamine, they might start experiencing symptoms. But for the most part, this is a manageable issue. And probably the biggest catch is the ingredients. The ingredients in store-bought cottage cheese sometimes include stabilizers, additives, and palm oil in the cheaper varieties, which themselves can cause some unwanted negative reactions, not the cottage cheese itself. Cheese with something else. For example, goat, sheep, or cow's milk varieties. Is there any difference? Yeah, of course. Sheep's milk cottage cheese is actually the richest in protein, fat, calcium, and vitamins. So if we line up these three types of cottage cheese, sheep's milk would probably be the leader. It's denser and has a richer flavor. Well, its flavor is, of course, very pronounced, creamy, sometimes with a slightly sweet aftertaste, and it has a very dense, creamy texture. It's an acquired taste, on the one hand, yes. On the other hand, we're just used to cow's milk cottage cheese, so to us it seems, well, like something different. Goat's milk cottage cheese is also an option. It's actually hypoallergenic. Its protein profile is very different from other types of cottage cheese, so many people who are allergic to cow's milk protein can easily tolerate goat's milk, but it does have a more piquant flavor, sometimes with a distinct goaty note. Well, it depends on how fresh it is and how much the product has been processed. Well, if you just can't handle any kind of cottage cheese, goat, cow, or sheep, then you can replace it with some worthy alternatives that have the key components. If we're talking about protein, what can we use as a substitute? Well, egg whites are, of course, the gold standard in terms of variety, so they're always a good fit. But Greek yogurt is also a good option. It's very similar in composition to cottage cheese, and it has 10 grams of protein per 100 grams of product. That's a lot. It has a slightly different texture, and it's easier to digest because it doesn't contain any lactose at all. That's why, for many people, Greek yogurt is a great option. If dairy alternatives just don't work for you at all, you can use soy-based cottage cheese. It's called tofu. It's an excellent source of plant-based protein. You can use the soft kind as a dessert or add it to smoothies, and the firm kind can be added to more savory dishes. Legumes like lentils, chickpeas, and beans are also a good alternative. Although the protein in those isn't complete, when you combine them with grains like rice or buckwheat, you get the full set of amino acids. That's also a good alternative. And as a last resort for protein, of course, you can use powdered casein, calcium caseinate, or plant-based protein. That's pure protein. There's no lactose or fat in it. And that's what is usually found in sports supplements. Or it's sold in pure form. You can also use powdered protein from sports stores if you really can't tolerate anything else at all. Now, if we're looking for a calcium alternative, there are plenty of different options for calcium. For example, canned sardines or salmon, if you eat it with the bones, are some of the best sources of easily absorbed calcium. Dark green leafy vegetables, cabbage, kale, and broccoli also contain a lot of calcium. And seeds and nuts are just a real treasure trove of calcium. Almonds have especially high amounts, as do sesame and poppy seeds, so a bun with sesame or poppy seeds for breakfast could actually cover your entire daily calcium requirement. So let's share this video, leave a couple of comments, give it a like if you enjoyed it, or a dislike if you didn't, and let's draw some practical conclusions. How do you choose cottage cheese and what should you eat? The ideal cottage cheese is the one with a short ingredient list, just milk and starter culture. Of course, there shouldn't be any salt in it, and it's better if it has a moderate fat content, around 5 to 9%. Fat-free cottage cheese, well, that's a matter of taste, of course, but it's usually less tasty, may contain more additives, and vitamins and micronutrients are absorbed worse from it, if they're absorbed at all. And for maximum benefit, it's best to combine any cottage cheese with sources of vitamin C, like berries or kiwi, so that calcium is absorbed better. And also with other healthy fats, like nuts or flax seeds, so that fat-soluble vitamins are absorbed more efficiently. A normal amount for a healthy adult is about 100 to 200 grams per day. A good serving covers your daily needs for protein and calcium. So cottage cheese is actually much more than just protein. It's a complex product that benefits your bones, muscles, liver, metabolism, nervous system, gut flora, and intestines. So when chosen wisely, its benefits are undeniable, which is confirmed both by scientific data and by the long-standing tradition of us eating it regularly. Well, I'll be waiting for your new questions about what else you'd like me to talk about. Be sure to write in the comments, and I'll see you soon in the next video.